Good evening. I'm Chris Matthews in Washington. We're following major breaking news on multiple fronts tonight, and all of it shows a White House in chaos. Today, President Trump followed the lead of Rush Limbaugh and Coulter, forcing a government shutdown over funding for his border wall. In just the last hour, General Jim Mattis, one of the last adults in the room in the Trump administration, announced he's leaving. And hanging over it all, NBC News is reporting tonight that the Mueller investigation is steamrolling toward a conclusion, reportedly by mid-February. First up, Trump's border wall fight. We live in a country where these people call the shots. They're the ones who told President Trump not to sign the bill to keep the government open.
It's a textbook example of what the drive-by media calls compromise. Trump gets nothing, and the Democrats get everything, including control of the House.
It'll just have been a joke presidency that scammed the American people, enraged, amused the populace for a while, but he'll have no legacy whatsoever.
I think that not funding the wall is going to go down as one of the worst things to have happened to this administration. Forget Mueller. The wall has to be built.
Well, the president tonight made sure they knew he heard them loud and clear.
I've made my position very clear. Any measure that funds the government must include border security. Has to. Not for political purposes, but for our country, for the safety of our community. This is not merely my campaign promise. This is the promise every lawmaker made.
But up until this morning, it was expected that the government would remain open. All that changed as Trump was bombarded by the fusillade from the right. That's all that's happened. The scene at the White House this morning was reportedly in turmoil. A person close to the president described him as 100% in a tailspin. Republicans on Capitol Hill were left in the dark about what the president would do next. Trump tried to shift the blame to the Republican leaders. He tweeted this morning, "I was promised the wall and the border security by leadership. It didn't happen." Republican House leaders were called to the White House this afternoon, where they were unable to convince the president to take the spending bill that's already passed the Senate.
We just had a very long, productive meeting with the president. The president informed us that he will not sign the bill that came over from the Senate last evening because of his legitimate concerns for border security.
Well, that comes as Trump personally called Rush Limbaugh to let him know the news.
Just received clearance. The president has gotten word to me that he is either getting funding for the border or he's shutting the whole thing down.
And now House Republicans are left with few options. If they pass a bill that includes the president's border wall funding, it will surely fail in the Senate, where Republicans lack the 60 votes they need. There's no plan beyond that at this point. So it looks like the government will face at least a partial shutdown tomorrow night at midnight. That's Friday night. And joining me right now is Republican Congressman Carlos Curbelo of Florida, former Congresswoman Donna Edwards, and Robert Costa, national political reporter for the Washington Post. Robert, thank you for coming on tonight. This is a strange, chaotic night in our country. Mattis is leaving. The government's about to shut down. And the president seems to be taking the lead of the hard right media, listening to Rush Limbaugh, slamming him for allowing the government to stay open and without the wall being put up. And Coulter, oh, my God, this is pretty far right for him to be listening to, as well as Laura Ingraham. Explain why the president has elephant ears for the right-wing media.
It's a chaotic night here in the newsroom at the Post, Chris. I feel like we're rewriting our story for tomorrow's paper by the hour due to all of this turbulence, the changing story. But at the bottom line is that this is a president under siege, a president who governs in part by watching television to see where his base is going. And he saw his base breaking with him on the eve of divided government. And he's thrusting his government toward a shutdown to make a point, a political point, that he's still with his core voters.
But he's listening to the media. These people, Rush Limbaugh, lead the people. You say he's listening to his constituency. Is Rush Limbaugh the chicken or the egg here? Is he telling his constituency where to go, or is he listening to them? I get the sense that the hard right media, who make a living off 5 or 10% of the country, are telling a president who represents 45 to 50% of the country what to do. The media can't tell 50% what to do. The media, even on the hard right, successful, big audience, right-wing audiences at Rush Limbaugh's radio show and on Fox, the big shows, they don't represent more than 5% of the country or 10%. Why is he thinking they represent the country?
This is a president who doesn't come out of Congress, has never governed until he was elected to the presidency. Chris, at the Capitol all last night, lawmakers were telling me they thought the leadership had backed the president away from a shutdown, that they could have some kind of short-term compromise and live to fight another day next year over a border wall. But the president, listening to Limbaugh, watching Fox News both at night and in the morning, he's trying to tweet to signal to his base, don't break with me. It was not only Ann Coulter, it was Mark Meadows, a North Carolina congressman, and a whole chorus of people on the right.
Well, moments ago, Democratic leaders Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi laid the responsibility of the shutdown squarely on the feet of the president. Let's watch them.
The president is doing everything that he can to shut the government down. Have to ask the question, why? Does he not believe in governance? Does he not care about the American people? Doesn't he know that the economy is uncertain? Hasn't he followed the stock market that he likes to brag about sometimes? There's something wrong with this picture.
Unfortunately, President Trump was attacked this morning and last night by the hard right, and fearful, he backed off his commitment to sign this bill.
Let's talk about Chuck Schumer, the Democratic leader in the Senate. I think he's got it just right. It's the way we all saw it today in our newsroom, that he's listening to these talkers from the right. Now, the talkers right, I keep reminding people, left or right, that when you're in the media and you're very much passionate about the news and you're talking to progressives and activists and you're recognizing that they are not 50%. But he has to talk, it seems to me, the president, at least to 45% of his own people, and yet he's listening to Limbaugh, who speaks for, 11 million people maybe on a big day.
That's right, Chris. It's troubling that these unelected individuals, they're influential, but they're unelected. No one has voted them into office. They're making these big decisions. And a lot of Republican members of Congress, I can tell you that probably a majority of my Republican colleagues do not agree with this decision. A majority of my Republican colleagues believe the right thing to do is to pass the bill that the Senate passed unanimously. And with regards to who's at fault here, I think the president has left very little question, because he said last week in his office that he would be the one that's responsible for shutting down the government. And he has now put us on that path, because even if the House tonight passes the bill with the border funding that's unacceptable to the Senate, it's going nowhere. So we're walking right into a dead end.
Oh. Donna, you know the difference between commentary and government because you've done both. And in this case, there is going to be an opening of the government at some point. Maybe not tomorrow night, maybe not after Christmas or New Year's or whatever, but they'll eventually reopen. But there's not going to be a wall. So what is going to happen here? It seems like this could be, like the market keeps going down, this could be a long-term stalemate where nothing gets agreed to.
Well, I mean, there isn't going to be a wall. And even if, say you go to a government shutdown like the one that we had in, 2013, 2014, it'll cost the economy $25 billion over the course of that time. And so, it doesn't, the numbers don't get better for the president, because in January, then he's dealing with a Democratic House.
Explain to somebody watching right now, why does it cost the government?
Well, it costs money because, one, you lose the money that you lose because you've got workers who are out of work. Two, you lose money because there's a whole bunch of business that the government does that it just can't.
It doesn't do it. By the way,
it's like traffic. It slows everything down.
Well, we know the president spends a lot of time catching up on Fox News. Here's a taste of what he's watching.
The president should veto this bill. This breaks a promise with his supporters. Everybody looking at this views this as odious.
We're right on this issue. This is a fight worth having.
I'm troubled by what's going on. I feel like the Republicans have caved in again. I think the president should dig in his heels. I'm a little disappointed that there's been sort of a mixed message going on.
This is a fumble, and we need to make sure that the president stays firm. And a lot of people are very nervous this morning about whether the president will cave or not.
This was the top issue, why people voted not just for this president, but for this administration. And it continues to be a top concern for voters across the country.
Robert, talk about this, the executive time the president calls it when he listens to this stuff. Does he just turn on the tube, turn on Fox, maybe check the other cable stations? But what does he do, walk away steaming? Or what's his reaction? He seems to be, in this case, getting his marching orders from Rush and Coulter.
During the campaign, the president used to tell me and other reporters that he'd watch television to make sure he knew where the news was going, and he'd try to jump into it like it was a river. So instead of paying for advertising, he was always reacting to the news. That's why now, even as president 2 years in, regardless of what advisors tell him about the whip count on Capitol Hill, he's always keeping an eye on the television. Where is the news cycle? What is that chyron? How can he try to adjust it? And so when he sees Fox News or another conservative outlet going in a certain direction, he may try to jump in against all of the advice of those around him to try to change the news and change what he thinks is his policy and his perspective.
What happened last night? What happened with Syria? I think he's taken his lead there from Rand Paul. People like me are very much against the neocons, but it's unusual for him to break like his behavior seems uneven lately, a little dodgy lately. I mean, he's jumping around I'm going to Mar-a-Lago, I'm not going to Mar-a-Lago, I'm letting the government stay open, I'm closing the government. I'm getting out of Syria in like 5 seconds. I mean, he doesn't seem to be sitting down and thinking much.
Pull it back a bit. The big picture here, if you talk to White House advisors, he's looking at divided government, and from the border wall to Afghanistan to Syria, he's trying to check the box and all of these signature campaign promises. Remember, during the campaign, he wanted to shrink the American footprint abroad. He's trying to tell his base with all of these moves, regardless of the consternation at the Pentagon and elsewhere, that he's ticking off those boxes for his political base as they get ready for the whirlwind that's going to be 2019.
So how's it going to look, Donna, to see the President of the United States down in 75-degree Florida, teeing off?
Well, it's going to look.
If he goes, I'm telling you, he may not go tomorrow, but he's going to go sooner or later, and this government's going to be shut down.
Well, it's going to look just like it sounded from his office, that he's proud to shut the government down. And people are going to start feeling the reverberations of that. And here, keep in mind, Chris, this is a guy who went to bed last night, cut a deal with Senate Republicans, and then got up this morning and is easily swayed by the last people who are on the news. This is erratic, it's chaotic, and it fits with a president who just doesn't really have a handle on governance anymore. Well, not that he ever did, actually.
Anybody's got money in the stock market is having a bad time right now, because especially old people in 401ks. I'm not talking about rich people, but anybody's got money in there. And Trump has always been Mr. Cheerleader for the stock market. It's got to be the backstory here.
Right.
Every day, 500 points, every day.
Well, Chris, and here's the bottom line. The president ran on border security. I think he has every right to insist that we invest more at the border. He did run on the issue, and he did win the election. What he doesn't understand, or what some people around him don't want to allow him to understand, is that if he wants that, he's going to have to compromise. And there's a very symmetrical compromise that's out there. More border security, permanent solution for DACA recipients. We proposed that. 121 of our colleagues in the House voted for it. Half Republicans didn't. Okay, no Democrats voted for it. That's the solution, though, not demanding my way or the highway.
I think you guys are right, but I think you got to go further and say comprehensive border.
That's right.
I'm all for it.
People have been here 10, 20 years. Come on, get off it. Nobody's going home. Nobody's trying to make them go home either. You just got to deal with some of the illegal hiring, and a lot of things have got to be dealt with. Thank you, but they don't want to do it. Thank you, Congressman Carlos Cabral. Thank you for offering reasonable centrism on this issue. Thank you, U.S. Is that all right?
I think so.
Okay, thank you. And former Congressman Don Edwards of Maryland, and Robert Costa.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me, or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.